Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to talk about something with the potential of being quite interesting. A connection that may exist between Ikoria and Nicol Bolas. In fact, it may be one of the reasons that Nicol Bolas turned out to be as powerful as he is. Now, this is purely lore speculation, and I'm going to admit that it is somewhat tenuous, right? This is more of a exercise in as opposed to a statement of facts. But considering what's going on out there in the wide world, any kind of distraction is welcome. Now, I can't take credit for putting this theory forward. I actually noticed this when I was roaming around on Reddit, so credit for pointing this out goes to the Flaming Draco, because this is actually a really interesting concept. So what could the possible connection between Nicol Bolas and Ikoria be? Well, before we start, I want to make sure that you don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that there's a potential that Nicol Bolas will show up on the plane of Ikoria, right? At the end of, for those of you who aren't like 100% up to speed, let's say you only got into Magic in the last number of months, Nicol Bolas was the main, like, big bad of this big, long storyline that honestly went on for too long between Nicol Bolas and the Gatewatch, and it was ultimately unfulfilling, right? You had Amonkhet, which to me is absolutely the most epic moment with Nicol Bolas in terms of like evil plans. Like legitimately taking an entire plane of existence, reworking their religion, wiping out all the adults, because that's what happened. He basically brainwashed their gods, turned them into his own servants, wiped out all the human population of adults and above, and just had kids, and then reworked their religion into something that he could manipulate into creating this gigantic army for himself. So that was an epic, it was so epic that you could actually have used that to establish like a brand new villain in Magic the Gathering. You could have had some new guy, Snarzleflu, and he just shows up and does this, and he would be immediately established as a big bad. But either way, Nicol Bolas had just the complete beatdown going on with the Gatewatch during the Amonkhet block, and then they kind of turned it around where Nicol Bolas's ultimate ploy resolved in War of the Spark, where all the Gatewatch and all these Planeswalkers got together to defeat him in what really felt like an underwhelming and unsatisfactory story. It really didn't live up to the hype, but all that happened over a long period of time. The end result is that the players essentially were struck with a malaise where they went, oh God, okay, I'm tired of the Gatewatch. I'm tired of Nicol Bolas. So what they did was say, okay, you know what? Nicol Bolas is defeated. There was actually a leak of the storyline back in the day where it's like Nicol Bolas gets outwitted. And he got outwitted in the way that they do in movies and things like that, where they just go, Nicol Bolas is a super genius, except we're not smart enough to figure out a way to beat a super genius, so let's just make him dumb. So it ends up with Nicol Bolas being defeated and trapped in the meditation plane, the meditation realm, whatever you want to call it, wherever he has his own specific place Nicol Bolas has created that he meditates in and chills thinking about his victories. I love myself, right? So he's trapped in that environment by Ugin. So that's where it stands currently. There are some people who are like, Nicol Bolas is never coming back, but Rosewater has already said, look, if we didn't want to bring Nicol Bolas back, we would have ended him as opposed to putting him in the timeout zone. So Nicol Bolas will be returning, but what we're about to talk about here has nothing to do with Nicol Bolas's return and more to do with the origin of his power. And it all traces back to some of those little spoilers. If you didn't watch the spoiler videos that I did, we got little tiny little nibbles of cheese of spoiler-esque, spoiler-ish items where Rosewater essentially gave you all these items on a list, and they were pretty exciting to talk about. I love stuff like that. But one of the things that came out where there were some multiple variations of creature types, one of them was a demon kraken. That's one of the creature types that we saw because Ikoria has all these crazy, gigantic, mutating beasts, so there's weird creature types shoved together, but a demonic kraken is what led to this whole thought process. So basically, I'm actually just going to use the paragraph that Flaming Draco here has copied out of the wiki because it will give us an idea of the old storyline, right? Because back in the day, Nicol Bolas was insanely powerful, but that power had to come from somewhere. So the paragraph says, some years later, Bolas fought a demonic Leviathan planeswalker on the still young plane of Dominaria. The fight lasted a month, reducing Matera to a third of its original size, and created the first temporal rift. In the end, the dragon relied upon his touch to defeat the foe. After the battle, Bolas feasted on the remains of the Leviathan over the course of a year, absorbing its power in the process. When he finished, naught was left besides what eventually became known as the Talon Gates and an assortment of blubber. Bolas regards the Talon Gates as his finest trophy and visits them in Madara as often as he can to relish that victory. Now, this is ancient magic history, right? And there's a number of interesting points that we can touch on in that. Now, the demonic Leviathan tying into a demonic Kraken, right? Because you have, like, where else do you see demonic Krakens in Magic the Gathering currently? Nowhere, right? They don't exist that way. Krakens are normally just regular sea beasts, obviously of gigantic scale, the type that can be massive 8/8s, like with Kiora Best the Sea God, all that sort of thing. But they're normally shown as regular elemental forces of nature. But there's something about Ikoria that has spawned a demon Kraken, right? And that is something very different than what we're used to. So thinking that a demonic Leviathan could have come from the same place is a perfectly reasonable assumption to make. Obviously, as I mentioned before, this is a bit tenuous, but it is a fun fuel for thought. Let's talk about some lore and cool story aspect of this situation. So this is a demonic Leviathan planeswalker. So this could have been a demonic Leviathan that gained its spark somehow in the lands of Ikoria. That could mean that the power level of these beasts is such that they can infuse other beasts as well, other creatures. Nicol Bolas spent a month fighting this, and then it took a full year for Nicol Bolas to actually incorporate the Leviathan's power into him. And the struggle between them was so titanic that it actually opened up a rift. And if you don't know what the rifts are, they're actually the reason that planeswalkers are weaker now. A number of rifts opened up in the multiverse because of a disparity and imbalance between the power of planeswalkers and the planes of existence themselves. It's like natural, and the energy of the multiverse, the power of the multiverse seeks a natural balance. And that balance is thrown off by planeswalkers with their godlike powers. They're able to make changes that shouldn't normally be able to be made, right? And as a result, you end up with these rifts. The first rift that is known actually was created specifically during this battle between this demon Leviathan and Nicol Bolas. So these rifts have a number of effects. They separate the mana of the plane from the plane itself, and they have a very profound effect on planeswalkers as well, where they will cause dizziness, confusion, disorientation, all this sort of thing are all a result of these rifts. And as the rifts, as more rifts show up, they have a compounding effect on each other, where the rifts will cause other rifts to grow. So it's just kind of a feeding off of each other scenario. And so these rifts grew and grew and grew until the time of the time spiral block, where planeswalkers started sacrificing their sparks to seal these rifts. And the result of all these rifts being sealed was for planeswalkers to lose their godlike powers. And still, they're still powerful enough that they can travel through the blind eternities. They can still basically wage like crazy level battles and things like that, but they're no longer godlike deities. Their power has been diminished. Now, Nicol Bolas is unique in that these rifts actually never affected him, and he existed during the time of planeswalkers having this godlike level of power. So it's interesting to me to think about the concept that Ikoria may actually be an ancient font of power, and depending on what kind of creature's essence you can get from there. Now, obviously, this demon Leviathan would be something very rare. Most of the time, when something has a planeswalker spark, it is in a humanoid creature, right? But the rules for planeswalker sparks are only set so hard and fast. We've seen that even with Calyx from Theros, where Calyx is a fabricated planeswalker. I mean, we didn't get the full story, so we don't actually know where his spark came from. We got that really cheesy paragraph at the end of the story blurb. I'm not willing to call it a story for Theros. The story blurb, where basically Calyx wants to get at Elspeth so bad that she walks off the plane and he just really, really wants to follow her, and then he just can. That's how they played it out, which is really bad. Like, honestly, what they should have done with that, in my opinion, is they should have said that Xenagos' spark somehow still existed, because Xenagos got destroyed by Elspeth. But his spark could have been somewhere in the underworld, something like that. Clothice could have found it and woven a new planeswalker around it. You know what I mean? Because Calyx is partially green. Xenagos was partially green. And you don't even need the mana color connection. You could easily take that and go, okay, this is how a planeswalker was created artificially. So, I mean, they play it a little bit loose with the generation of planeswalker sparks. You could theoretically have like a random beast like a Leviathan become a planeswalker and evolve. Like, it's an interesting concept. The idea that Ikoria could be this ancient font of power that led to Nicol Bolas gaining in power at his, like, he literally gained so much power during that it took him a year to absorb it all, and he considers it his greatest victory. The Talon Gates, as they're known, are actually the remnants of that demonic Leviathan. They look like a rocky kind of outcropping, actually very similar to the Bolas horns that you see in the Meditation Realm. But either way, this is just an interesting little like speculation into what could have happened in the ancient past. Some sort of Leviathan planeswalker demon left Ikoria, wandered around to different places, ends up battling against Nicol Bolas. Nicol Bolas absorbs his power. Now that admittedly is like a bit of filling in the gaps, like I'd really like for this to be a real story kind of thing. So I'm not stating it anywhere near fact, but I thought it would be an enjoyable aside to just give us something all to talk about today that isn't really depressing. So thanks for coming by, everybody. A big shout out to my patrons who are scrolling on by me on the screen here, and a shout out to all my channel members. You can see them in the comments there with their beautiful shields beside them. Thank you very much for supporting my channel. Thanks everybody for coming by, and I will see all of you very soon, my friends.